Hi, my name is Jonathan Hicks. I'm back at the Dice Cup, and this evening I'm joined by...
Amy.
Matt. Jack.
Steve. And we just finished playing Pandemic Iberia, which is very similar to base Pandemic, and I'm going to assume you know how to play normal Pandemic. I'm just going to explain the differences here. But as you can see, it's set in Iberia. And it's also set, I think, in the 1800s, so medicine is not quite as developed as it is in the modern age, so your job is a little bit harder. So key differences are, obviously, you're moving around the board here trying to remove the disease cubes and things and stop all the outbreaks, and you have a typical hand of cards, and you need to first of all build a hospital for each of the different colours. So you can see we've got the hospital that lets you do research into the red disease. There's a hospital here that does research into the black disease. And in order to build a hospital, you have to discard the actual card of that city. So if you discard Hain, no idea how you pronounce that, then you can build the black hospital there. Now, once you've got the hospitals of the different colours, then you can potentially do research into the disease. And again, you're trying to collect the colours. If you get 5 of one colour, so if I were to collect 5 black, for example, then I could travel to the black hospital, and then I could research black, which gets the little microscope thing on here. And once you do research for each of the 4 diseases, then you win the game. Other actions, you can see there's railroad tracks all over the board here. On your turn, if you are in a location, you can build one of the railroad tokens in any of the spaces kind of adjacent to that one. And then when you move, you either move normally along the lines, or if you decide to move along the railroad track, you can go as far as you like along a railroad route. So that makes travel around here much, much faster, because otherwise it's very difficult at the start of the game to actually get to the various areas where the disease cubes are breaking out. And other key actions, you can see there's like a water droplet here, is Purification, because it's much harder to treat the disease. You can only ever remove 1 cube. There's no way of removing more than 1 cube at once. But you can potentially put Purification tokens out. So if I was next to this region here, let's say I moved to here, and I wanted to put some Purification tokens here, I'd have to discard a matching colour of one of the areas around this region. So for instance, if I discarded the yellow card, I could then take 2 Purification tokens, and it goes into this region. And then whenever these cards come up here, so Girona, for example, when this comes up, instead of adding a cube there, because that would obviously cause an outbreak, it's on 3 cubes, you would remove one of these instead. So these kind of absorb disease cubes as they come out and protect you from the inevitable outbreaks. So you're trying to get as much of the Purification out as possible while trying to build your train network to be able to reach all these different places. Usually it goes quite badly to start with until you've got your train network going. And then, as I say, you're trying to build the hospitals and do the research to get the different diseases researched. Now, you do also get some, we used a few of them, didn't we? Like special ability cards, as well as the epidemics. We had a bunch of these, didn't we? Where are these gone? Here we go, here's one. So there's a bunch of these special ability cards as well that are different from the basic Pandemic one. So this is move a pawn to anywhere on the board. This one, you can move a pawn for free. Everyone can do that kind of by any route. I notice it also talks about ships on here. The last kind of movement you can do is using ships. You can see a lot of these have got the anchor for ports. If you're at a port, any of these ports, you can move to any other port. Maybe you want to go to Porto, as long as you discard a card that matches the colour of where you're going to. So if I discard a blue, I can move to that city here. So moving around is quite important. And obviously moving to the ports is easier because of the port thing, but it's difficult to move into the centre, which is why you really need the train tracks. All right, what do we think?
I really like the sort of edition of Pandemic because it has enough differences from the base game that I've played the base game a bit too much now, a bit bored of it, and this brings enough different elements that makes it really difficult again. And you have optional sort of choices if you want to make it even harder and have each of the diseases have a different effect when it outbreaks, which is really interesting. You can play with or without those depending on if you've played it before, but I really like the different travel options, and the theme is really lovely because they do make it travel across each element of the game. So I really like this, really like this variant of Pandemic.
Okay. Matt?
Yeah, it's a slightly more difficult version of Pandemic, so if you're finding normal Pandemic too easy, this is nice. And the way the water purification works is a nice touch. It's a little bit like the quarantine tokens in some of the other versions, but the way it affects a region makes it a very kind of strategic choice where you place those. So yeah, it's a great addition to the Pandemic family.
Jack?
I think it's great. I mean, I'm going to start off and just say that it looks fantastic. Like, the cards normally in like regular Pandemic, they're very like well labelled. They say this is the epidemic cards, these are the infection cards, these are the city cards, and everything's sort of very labelled and shiny in plastic. Whereas this is like very pretty pictures, and all the cubes are wooden instead of plastic instead. It's quite nice. But yeah, they did make it much harder than the regular Pandemic, but they compensated for that by giving you all these modes of transport and such. And I feel like if we didn't push very hard for the train tracks, we would have lost by a landslide. It's very much a lot of like taking some hits at the beginning to get some planning out for your future the rest of the game, and it worked. It was a good game.
Okay, Steve?
The two main additions of the train and the Purification. The trains, again, everyone's saying it's essential to get your train route going out, because obviously it's much harder to move around, especially the centre of the board in this game. And so if you spend a lot of your early turns doing that, you're not fighting or doing the diseases. So the Purification tokens kind of give you a bit back. You have to spend a card to do it, which isn't necessarily a great thing, I suppose. But I don't think anyone ever discarded down to hand size. They kind of, well, you know, I'm going to use this card for that. And putting the tokens out, so if I've got two cities that I have to deal with, both the 3 cubes in next to each other, I'm like, I don't know which one to go, I don't know which one's going to come out next. I haven't got time to, because obviously at the start when your rail network's not there, you haven't got time to deal with them both, so you can kind of just purify in between them, and then if either card comes out, you kind of negate that. That's quite nice. We played 5 players, and towards the end of the game, my turns had already been planned out for me, which, you know, I did that on some other people's turns, but I'm like, well, you know, fair enough. It gets to the point where you solve it. Well, you know, we need Amy to win on her turn, which means Jonathan on his turn needs to do that, which means on my turn I need to go and sort that out, otherwise we might lose. And, you know, if you don't like the co-ops for that sort of reason, this doesn't actually take the alpha gaming situation away. You can still have that. Although no one actually really dominated the game here, the fact that sometimes it feels a bit miffed. You feel a bit miffed when your next 2 turns have been planned for you without you doing any of the planning. So if that's something that's going to put you off a game, this doesn't actually solve that problem.
Rating?
6.5.
Okay. Jack?
8.5.
I would give it 7.5.
I'd be on a 7.
Okay. I really like Pandemic generally, and I played it a lot, particularly with my family. It always goes down very well, but as Amy says, I've played it so much I kind of want to change. And this currently is my favourite version of Pandemic. I really like this one. Love the artwork. I love the kind of setting, the theme of it. And the Purification tokens is a really nice mechanic. As Steve says, there's quite a bit of strategy to think about there, which you don't get in the sort of base Pandemic. And needing to plan out your rail network is really important as well. Not just getting them down as quickly as possible, where do we want them to be? So it gives you lots of interesting decisions, and it's super tight. You know, every time I've won this, and I don't know, I've probably played this 10 or 12 times now, and I think tonight I won my 2nd ever game. It's just really, really hard. And when we've won, it's always come down to the wire. It's always been super close. But I like that. It really gives you a challenge. You've got to plan very carefully each of your turns. So if that appeals to you, I think you'll really like this one. I'd be on an 8 out of 10. Right, thanks very much for watching. That was Pandemic Iberia.